Well, welcome everybody to Data Talks 2019, Finance and Pension. We are joined today by 90% of the finance and pension companies that exist within the top 100 businesses within Denmark. So for me, as I type my very secure password in, it was password 1, by the way. I think for me, this sends a very clear and direct message. So for me, the fact that we're represented by that type of makeup of audience, it sends a pretty clear message to me. It sends a message that enterprise companies are struggling with making their data talk. They're struggling with becoming data-driven. And we have and are joined by fantastic speakers from leading finance and pension companies across the Nordics. And their focus today will be to really talk about the why. Why should you start to get involved with putting in a proper data foundation to let your data talk? Now, in the data space, it's a really overwhelming and confusing industry. And I think one of the ways to portray this is, I see a couple of faces in the audience that joined us last November in our Data Talks 2018. And we went through the market trends at the time. This was November last year. And as the time of November, it's really no surprise that still big data, machine learning, business intelligence were really the leading market trends. And of course, we're just using Google trend data to fuel this tag cloud. The bigger the keyword, obviously, the bigger the trend. GDPR was losing a lot of its momentum. It did peak in May, and really it highlighted how much of a sporadic, volatile type of industry we are, where trends can last for a small amount of time. But really, this was the landscape. This was what was the trends of last November 2018. And I'll go back and forth in these slides a little bit just to show the comparison. But if we fast forward to today, so approximately 5 or 6 months later, the thing that is highlighted here is that our industry changes so quickly that certain keywords that were not even on the radar last year in November are suddenly starting to dominate the market trends. So for example, business intelligence, machine learning still very prevalent in our industry. GDPR losing more and more types of momentum. And technologies like stream analytics, insights engines, linked data, data ops really didn't exist as a large trend last November. For me, this adds to the complexity of our space. And we're talking about finance and pension space, but really just generic. When you add all of the regulation and the compliance that we need to adhere to, when you struggle with the data that is siloed across your business, very hard to integrate, very hard to prepare, some of the things that Rika also alluded to, we start to kind of gather why it's so complicated to navigate this landscape. Now, one of the things we always like to do at Data Talks is let the data talk. So let's go into look at some trends right now. So the first trend is 3 different platforms that are kind of synonymous with helping companies become data-driven. These are the kind of top 3 that we see at most companies and most of our customers as well. So we've got the data warehouse, we've got the data lake, we've got the data hub. Now the way to interpret this is not that the yellow line, which is represented by the data hub, not that it's 5 or 6 times more popular than the data warehouse or the data lake. The way to interpret it is that this is the trends, that the data hub is at a peak in its trend right now. And there's a lot you can, I guess, extrapolate from this that you could probably presume. Well, the first would be that most of the enterprise companies that we work with, they've had and will have a data warehouse for a very long time. It's a critical part of their overall technology stack. And more we're seeing that with the data lake technology as well, that it's really just an expectation that most large businesses, especially in the finance and pension space, are starting to invest in these types of technologies. But like I alluded to before in the tag cloud, Data Hub really wasn't on the spectrum too much last year, but it's really now it's entering its peak. Let's head into the data privacy space, because really when we're talking about finance and pension, we are talking about very heavily regulated, legislated types of industry businesses. And GDPR was the leading topic in the data space for 2018. But really from this slide you can see that a lot of that came from, you could probably guess this is May 2018. And you can see that more, I guess, recent privacy acts like CCPA, which is the Californian Privacy Data Act out of the US, really doesn't even put a blip on the radar. Let's head to the finance section specifically, PSD2. Now PSD2, just as at a general kind of description, is the idea of financial companies having to share internal data with third-party systems, right? So for example, some of our customers like Saxo Bank and Nordea, they're having to make some of their data on their customers available so startups and new businesses can consume that data to serve other products. We can see that really it follows a very similar trend line and interest to CCPA, but peaked just last month in March. Let's head to some of the technologies. Apache Hadoop has been one of the, I guess, core fundamental foundations of most enterprise companies for their big data solution. It's I guess, a distributed data processing engine to handle big loads of data. But we can see that more modern types of technologies that quite honestly solve completely different things in the data space follow a similar trend line, but now we're starting to see a divergence at the end. Now, we could extrapolate something from this. The first could be an assumption that most of the companies that are looking into technologies like Apache Kafka maybe already have Apache Hadoop environment in place. They're just trying to extend what is already their data platform. One of the things that highlights to me having an engineering background is that we have a tendency in our industry to always flock towards something new, thinking that it will be the overall problem, a solver of our problems. Whereas one of the things we've learned time after time working with our customers is that the foundation that you provide of data to your business will never stop evolving. It will never stop growing. And just jumping onto new technology is not always the type of solutions that we should be looking for. The final market trend I would like to touch on, I find a little bit ironic. Without a doubt, when we're working with some of our customers like ISS, like Top Denmark, like Saxo Bank, like Nordea, like Barclays, without a doubt, they know that to get good value out of business intelligence, advanced analytics, machine learning, that they need good quality data. But from the market trends, there really is no correlation between this. And this is some of the struggles that we're seeing businesses go through now, and it kind of helps, but doesn't help, that we are also bombarded with leading market analyst firms like Gartner and IDC and Forrester telling us that 60% of the time that we're going to spend in getting value out of data and letting our data talk is spent in data preparation phase. And actually, if we look at the chart in the middle, for those who can't see it, I'll explain it. We can see that 60% of time is spent on data preparation. This is a big category. It encapsulates a lot of things. It would be data cleaning. It would be data normalization. Around 20%, 19% is for collecting data sets. So integrating data, blending it, figuring out where it exists across the business, figuring out who the product owner is. And 5% is for other. And I don't know what that 5% makes up, but I'm going to make an assumption that it includes things like data governance, data compliance, kind of the typical things that really need to be mandated in most businesses today. So that's 85% that is spent on the things that you do before you do anything with it. So before you give it to the data science teams, the machine learning teams, before you can get the best value out of business intelligence, out of reporting tools, etc. And we see quotes like this, that the average company is losing $9.7 million US per year just on this particular process. Now, for those of you who were at Data Talks last year, you'll remember this slide. This is something that we as a business are updating constantly. We refer to it as the data landscape. It's essentially all the technology components that when we walk into a business is required to help them become as data-driven as possible. The slide here is not to show you, here's what you need to do. It's to highlight it's really overwhelming what businesses have to put in place. And like I alluded to before, when new technology comes, do we have to adopt those technologies as well? One of the funny things is that if you're on the cusp of technology today, in 6 months you might not be. So this is to help overwhelm you. But it's also one of the reasons why businesses aren't becoming data-driven is because they think of their foundation of data like this. I've lost track of the times I've talked to business users at our customers and they're using terminologies like, well, please get that out of the data warehouse. You need to take this through the data governance team. These are things that the business should not be using in their vocabulary. It should be something that's much more like this. This is what we need to move towards to become properly data-driven businesses, is a data foundation. A place where all the complexity that we sit through on a day-to-day basis around governance, around integration of data, around preparation of the data is pushed below the fold. That we can deliver to our business something that abstracts a lot of the complexities that we go through every day with getting data to the forefront of business. This is including things like discovery of data, integrating data, governance and compliance, consent management of what you can use your data for, and more. So with that in mind, most of the speakers today will be focusing on what they've been able to do once they have a data foundation in place. What I would like to highlight during the next 10, 15 minutes at most is what it looks like to have a data foundation in place. So what are the components that you need in place to be able to fuel a business, fuel the machine learning teams, fuel the business intelligence teams with less friction, more value? So what I would ask you all to do is to cross all your fingers and toes as I take you through a demonstration of the data foundation. Now, I am on Google Wi-Fi, so it should be pretty damn good. So first of all, I would like to highlight being here with our partner Google, that we have deployed a version of the data foundation into the Google Cloud platform. So we're utilizing the backbone, the infrastructure, and to be honest, one of the best networks, like internet networks out of the cloud providers. That's why I'm thinking this will go fast. So this is the operational data hub for us. Everything that I need to know about bringing in data from across the business and making it available to the rest of the business is fueled through this operational platform. So we can see here a lot of notifications around things that need to be done across the business. But let's head over to our integration section. This is where most of the complexity, first of all, lies in figuring out where is the data you need to integrate, how does it blend all together to produce a unified, cohesive set of data. Now, we have a couple of integrations already plugged in here. We've got things like file storage and calendars and contacts and mail. So imagine that I need to give the business intelligence team and the machine learning team data on our customers. Now, when I think about customer data, I think about the CRM system. So I head over to connect some data. And this is where you'll find platforms like Salesforce, Dynamics. You'll find older platforms like even Lotus Notes is there. And yes, believe it or not. And thank God I didn't work on that one. What we're going to do is at CluedIn, we use a CRM called HubSpot. So that's where our customers lie. And at this point, the common complexities is that everybody needs to get in a room. All the architects need to get in a room, and they need a whiteboard the size of Copenhagen. And then we need to draw boxes of how all our systems connect to each other in a very point-to-point type of system. So at CluedIn, we use this integration pattern we call eventual connectivity. And it completely eliminates this need for these classic designer systems of how to blend different systems together. Now, because I'm logged into HubSpot on another browser tab, it's picked up the authentication token from my cookie. I'm going to authenticate. It connects, that's good. Thank you, Google. And the first thing it's going to do is give me an example of what data it's going to bring in. So if we just zoom in for a moment, did that work? Yes, it did. We've got things like organizations, deals, contacts. These are the classic things we would expect from a CRM system. If I click next, I have at this point the ability to set up things like access control and permissions. I have the ability to set up policies, like maybe I don't want to bring in certain amounts of data, or maybe I don't want to bring in certain types of data from the CRM system. Maybe I can stop personal data coming into the data hub. But for me, the next thing I want to do is set up real-time data. So this is HubSpot basically telling me that as soon as I get the data in my system, I'm going to push it over to the hub. So let's do that. This is where you should cross your fingers. Because what this is doing now, it's a good start, is it's using the backbone of Google Cloud to spin up more infrastructure, to bring this data in as fast as possible while still adhering to all of these limitations on throttling from the source system. So we don't want to completely pummel HubSpot's API and get banned. This is all included in the platform. So in a couple of moments, the crawl part should be finished. And then it's going to head into a processing type of stage. It's at this point that we can set up things like product owners, data owners. This is more around the governance part of the platform. So our crawling has finished, and it's now going off to process. Now, within a couple of moments, our processing should be finished. We should have around 2,000, 3,000 records that are coming over. And this is when we get our first glimpse of what we're dealing with. The first thing I am met with is what is the quality of data that sits within this platform. And there are multiple metrics that need to be scored for this. So classic things like accuracy, things like validity, relevance, connectivity. We can see a full breakdown of all of the metrics that we get from that source system. Now you'll notice that some of these are in red. That means that the metrics fall below what we have set as acceptable for our business. So for something like accuracy, which is the first score you see, 55%. That falls well below what we accept as a business to make available to the business intelligence team. After all, with 55% accuracy data as raw, they'll get 55% types of quality of results in their business intelligence tools. So I'm going to head over and I'm going to now make this data available to consumers. Now, because we're here at Google, why don't we do this to Google's BigQuery, which is kind of a business intelligence data warehouse type of environment. Before I stream that data over, we'll notice that some of the notifications that I was getting while I was crawling that data from the source, it was telling me, I have some data for you to clean. I've found some data that you or the data owner or someone is responsible for cleaning because it falls below these acceptable thresholds. Let's click on that. So this is the challenge that we often find with working with customers, is that half the time we don't even know what quality we're dealing with. And the other half is figuring out, well, which data do I actually have to clean? So utilizing this type of technique in this process, we can actually proactively say, well, because you've set the threshold of what you accept, I'll just load up all the data that falls below those thresholds. That's the data you need to clean. So user interfaces like this, data engineers can really start to play a role in preparing the data even more for the forefront of business. Now let's head over and start to push this data out to the business. One of the ways that we recommend this is, in our industry right now, we're talking a lot about self-service. We're talking a lot about data discovery and the complexity that comes around that. It is true. There is complexity in that. And so if we flip this process on its head, and actually that we can push data out from the operational hub using streaming, we can actually be the part of the business that makes the data easily available to the tools where people can add value. So let's do that. So for example, if I wanted to create a stream, and I'll call it Data Talks 2019, I might want to send, let's get that. I want to get organizations. And what I'm wanting to do is I want to provide the business intelligence team with our customer data. So for that, I would need some type of catalog of what data I actually have available to send out to the business. So let's do that. So if I just look at the HubSpot deal stage, has ever been equal to closed one, then I would like you to export this data on a stream. And because we've already authenticated to the targets of where we can push data, it's simply a matter of picking from a drop-down, choosing BigQuery, and saving. Now that stream is going to set up. The first thing it's going to do is start to push this data over to our BigQuery account for our data warehouse team to start doing their magic on it. And one of the things that we get to see is, well, what is actually the scores of data that we're sending out on this particular stream? So we can start to have tracing around what level of quality of data are we giving to that part of the business. And you can actually see some of the data here as well that's being pushed out to those consumers. So if I was to head over to BigQuery, which I can do, see there, and let me just refresh the page. Here we go. Our data is now, well, you can see here we're starting to push that data over. So really we've reversed the whole pattern of data discovery in that we provide an operational hub where we can produce data and deliver it to different parts of the business at their requests. So for me, when I read statistics, like 85% of time in enterprise companies is spent in preparing data to deliver to the business, I think these types of pillars of making sure integration, preparation, governance, all of these are pushed below the belt. All of these are provided by a foundation. And whether that foundation is built off Hadoop, whether it's built off old classic SQL databases, for me, that's not the problem. That's a technology choice. For me, it's that the complexity where, for example, most people working with data today are also somehow required to know a lot about data compliance and data governance. Why? They're not experts in that field, yet if you talk to most people working with data, and Rika also alluded to it before, we all seem to have to be GDPR experts now, right? And this is some of the friction of why we aren't, as enterprise businesses, able to make our data talk. So with that in mind, I hope I've highlighted and helped highlight to you the values of putting in a proper data foundation at your business. And for the speakers that will be coming up for the rest of the day, I'm sure they'll be sharing many war stories. But I think there's a common trend and theme between all of our speakers is that they're showing you why you should do this, why you should put in a proper data foundation and allow your data to talk. And this will cover from use cases that they've solved with machine learning, with business intelligence, even classical reporting types of approaches. So with that in mind, I would like to introduce you to our first speaker. Now, I have to admit, well, you can probably tell I'm not Danish. And I asked 15 different people, 15 Danes, how do you properly pronounce the name of this company? So is it Enetel? Yep, there you go. Enet it is. So Michael and I talked last week, and please come up here, Michael. What he will be taking you through is an example of, you can just use this one here, of how, of course, Michael will introduce himself, but Michael comes from the financial industry. And so a lot of the challenges you could probably assume that come out of that are challenges like regulations, being highly regulated. And one of our speakers later will be is the CDO of Nordea. And he will also highlight that really on a yearly basis, they are bombarded with new regulations that they constantly have to keep up to date with. And really they don't know what new audits and things like that are going to come around the corner. So while we get the slides up and running, maybe Michael, you can introduce yourself, but thank you for coming to Data Talks, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.